Kimi Raikkonen was at his swashbuckling best in the 2005 Formula 1 season, but despite his brilliance behind the wheel and the speed of the McLaren MP420, the World Championship eluded him. McLaren's spectacular 2005 car was the culmination of work Adrian Newey had started with the radical failed MP418 from 2003, which we explain in great detail in its own video on this channel. McLaren was able to go even more aggressive with the side pod undercut Newey had come up with for its B-Spec 2004 car, and it reacted to rule changes raising the front wing for 2005 by raising the lower wishbone of the front suspension, which allowed the airflow to pass freely from the front wing to the bargeboard area. The MP420 also featured the introduction of a seamless shift gearbox, which McLaren estimated was worth at least 0.3 of a second per lap, as there was no loss of acceleration during the gear change process. It was a phenomenal car with a driver hitting his peak in F1, but this was a combination that would come up short in 2005, and here's why. Rain mixed up the grid for the season opener, but 10th on the grid still put Raikkonen 3 places ahead of eventual champion Fernando Alonso. Then he stalled on the grid ahead of the formation lap and was forced to start from the pits. While Alonso came through the field to 3rd, Raikkonen could only claim the final point in 8th, losing 5 points to the Spaniard at the first attempt. McLaren didn't have a great handle on the MP420 and was struggling to unlock the car's potential, so Raikkonen was never a factor to challenge Alonso for victory in Malaysia. But he was making progress from 6th on the grid with a long first stint, briefly leading before making his pit stop. Then on his outlap, a tyre valve failed, deflating his tyre and leaving him limping back to the pits for a new one. He could only recover to 9th, losing 10 points to Alonso. The gap to Alonso was up to 19 points by round 4 at Imola, but McLaren had found its feet with the MP420 and Raikkonen led the race from pole position. He looked comfortable out front, only for a drive shaft failure to force him out of the race after just 9 laps. Alonso went on to win in a dramatic finish with Michael Schumacher, putting Raikkonen 29 points adrift already. Back-to-back wins for Raikkonen in Spain and Monaco brought the gap down to 22 points heading to the Nürburgring. Despite an error at turn 5 briefly costing him the lead to 3-stopping pole sitter Nick Heidfeld, Raikkonen had the race under control until he developed a nasty flat spot on his right front tyre after locking up when lapping Jacques Villeneuve's Sauber. With ground to make up in the championship, McLaren decided to take the risk of staying out with the damaged tyre, which shook the suspension to pieces at the start of the final lap. Raikkonen was out in dramatic circumstances and Alonso inherited the win. Instead of bringing the gap down to 20 points, it was now up to 32. You could argue that this race didn't cost Raikkonen anything, as both he and Alonso non-scored due to all the Michelin teams withdrawing on a dark day for Formula 1. But Raikkonen was on the front row alongside a very light-fueled Toyota of Jarno Trulli, with Alonso 6th. Had the race gone ahead, there's every chance Raikkonen would have won it, giving him the chance to at least get the gap down to 20 points, even if Alonso finished 2nd. Raikkonen was furious when Ron Dennis told him 10 minutes before the start that he wouldn't be racing. As they argued about it, Raikkonen said he wanted to go ahead with it and the others could go home if they didn't want to drive. The Michelin-shod drivers were supposed to stay in their cars when they pulled into the pits, on the off chance a last-second resolution could be found. But after ranting on the radio, Raikkonen climbed out of his car before it was even pushed back into the garage. McLaren's reliability wasn't good enough in 2005, and in France Raikkonen took the first of his grid penalties for engine changes following a Mercedes failure in practice. Starting with a heavy fuel load, he was able to charge through from 13th to 2nd, but crucially Alonso won the race, extending his championship lead by another 2 points. It was more of the same next time out at Silverstone, as another engine change turned 2nd on the grid into 12th for Raikkonen. McLaren teammate Juan Pablo Montoya stopped Alonso taking another win, but the Renault driver gained another 2 points on Raikkonen whose charge to third was helped by Alonso's teammate Giancarlo Fisichella stalling at a pit stop. Raikkonen led the German Grand Prix from pole position for 36 laps before hydraulics failure put him out, handing the win to Alonso and turning a likely 2-point gain into another 10-point loss. Ron Dennis said the failure was caused by finger trouble, leaving a bleed nipple loose in the gearbox. Montoya wasn't in a position to limit the damage this time, having crashed in qualifying when he'd been on course to join Raikkonen on the front row. Back-to-back wins in Hungary and Turkey repaired some of the damage after Germany, but Raikkonen took another engine change penalty at Monza, costing him a pole position. Montoya prevented Alonso taking victory, but this time Raikkonen only came back to fourth, having to make an extra pit stop to replace a damaged left rear tyre and having a spin at the second chicane. Had Raikkonen led Montoya home for a McLaren 1-2, he could have gained 4 points on Alonso and brought the gap down to 20. Instead, Alonso increased his lead by another 3, taking it up to 27. Across the 9 races we've highlighted there, Alonso gained 52 points on Raikkonen. At times through the year, the Spaniard admitted that Renault was struggling to find an answer to McLaren's pace, but his relentless consistency didn't give Raikkonen a way back into the title fight. Even on Raikkonen's good days, things behind him played into Alonso's hands. In Turkey, Raikkonen thought he'd led home a McLaren 1-2, only to be told on the radio on the slowing down lap that Montoya, who'd been hit earlier in the race by the lapped Jordan of Thiago Montero, had gone off in the closing stages to allow Alonso through to second. Alonso inherited another second place at Spa when Montoya was taken out by the lapped Williams of Antonio Pizzonia, and next time out in Brazil he followed the McLarens home to claim his first World Championship. Raikkonen was left to remind everyone of his brilliance with a phenomenal charge in Japan to win from 17th on the grid with a last lap pass on Fisichella, but 2005 was a year of what might have been. What do you think of the 2005 Formula 1 season? Was Alonso the right champion, or should the title have gone to the faster combination of Raikkonen and McLaren? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.